Hi, my name is Eva Steiner, and this is my project Psychotherapists Around the Globe. I am interviewing the psychotherapists around the world and asking them the same 8 questions. I am wondering how mental health profession is in their country. Today we are going to...
Thank you
Yeah.
for doing this interview with me. Before we start, can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Thank you so much for contacting me to do this. And I commend you for the wonderful idea to gather all the colleagues around the world. So I'm very excited to participate and represent Montenegro. So my name is Milena Ratkovic-Fahili. I'm a certified counselor in psychotherapy, and I'm on my 4th year of psychotherapy education. So I will soon also be a psychotherapist. I am also a psychologist, and I also have a degree in political science, which I rarely mention, but it is a part of my CV. And my psychotherapeutic approach is systemic family therapy, and this is what I am certified in.
Tell me a little bit about your culture. What is some holiday or tradition that your country celebrates? And if your culture would be an emotion, what emotion would it be?
Montenegro is fairly young country. It became independent again only in 2006. It is situated in the Southeast Europe. In the Balkans, or it's part of the Western Balkans. The culture is very typical Balkan culture. We are very prideful, and we're very much proud of how resilient we are, and very proud of our previous historical achievements in different wars. The main holidays are actually religious holidays, and I have to say that Montenegro is a very diverse country, especially religiously. Majority of people are Orthodox Christians, but then we have also Catholic Christians. We have people who are Muslim. We have Jewish community and many smaller religious communities. So the main holidays are kind of Christmas, Easter, Eid, Ramadan, etc. But maybe what's interesting to me, and that kind of reflects most our collective identity, is I think the Statehood Day, which is on the 13th of July, and we celebrate the date when in 1878 Montenegro was first recognized as an independent country. And then on the 21st of May, we celebrate the Independence Day, and that's when Montenegro kind of regained its independence in 2006. So I would say if Montenegro could be an emotion, it's not a core emotion, but it's definitely pride. Sense of resilience as well. Montenegro was such a small nation, but it was almost always in the past occupied by like a bigger nation. It was the Ottoman Empire, the Venetians, then in the Second World War. And I feel like we were kind of very, very resilient during those times, and people have endured a lot. So when we speak about our culture and when we look at our history, it's always a story of survival.
How did you become a psychotherapist in your country, and what is your therapeutic approach?
I haven't become a psychotherapist or a counselor in my country because Montenegro doesn't have any registered or licensed psychotherapy schools. So people from Montenegro, if they want to become certified, they have to look elsewhere. And because of the language, Serbia for us is the closest country to do this in. Well, we don't technically do it in Serbia. Serbian schools who are internationally certified, or at least certified at the level of Europe, they come to Montenegro and then they hold educational workshops here. And my certification with the Association of Systemic Therapists from Serbia, and it's also a certified association at the European level. Because in Montenegro also we don't have any legal foundation for not only therapists, but also psychologists. So what I'm doing is an education in systemic family therapy. I'm already a counselor, and now in my 4th year, I'm a psychotherapist under supervision. And soon I will become a fully certified psychotherapist. I am also a psychologist. So I graduated from applied psychology from a local university in the capital of Montenegro.
And for psychology, what does that mean that there is no law? So as a psychologist, are you allowed to work like in a public setting, or you can only work private? If there is no law, I want to understand a little bit deeper.
Yes, you can work. There's obviously clinical psychologists, there's school psychologists, there are psychologists working in different companies, people who are doing business psychology. But legally, it is not exactly precisely defined what it means to be a psychologist. So even though we have faculty of psychology, we have two. We have a public one and we have a private one. It is not exactly defined what it means to be a psychologist, but that also doesn't mean that you can't work as one. So it's more so the need to one day, through legal means, have a psychological chamber, which will make sure that things are also done ethically correct, and that we can kind of be in agreement of what it means to be a psychologist in a sense. Do you need 3 years? Do you need just a bachelor's, or you maybe need a master's? Or if you're a clinical psychologist, what kind of special education you need? And we have psychologists in various public and private institutions and enterprises.
And psychotherapists, the same? Can you work publicly?
For psychotherapy, is different. There are no public psychotherapists. There are psychiatrists, for example, who also have education in psychotherapy. And there are psychologists as well who have education in a certain discipline or a certain school of psychotherapy. But there isn't a job, at least not in the public enterprises, that is specifically called psychotherapist. But privately, in private clinics or companies even, people can ask for psychotherapists. And if they come from a certified association, like the one in Serbia, who is kind of internationally recognized, then it is not a problem for them to work.
Mm-hmm. So that's different between psychologists and psychotherapists in Montenegro.
Absolutely, yes. That's a huge difference, yeah.
How society looks upon psychotherapy or any psychological help?
I think that is kind of evolving, especially since the coronavirus pandemic has changed a lot for the better. I think before that, there was a huge stigma around it. It wasn't something that was spoken about openly. Not that it changed hugely now, but at least now there's a lot of kind of public campaigning to take care of your mental health, to seek help, etc. Before, it wasn't so much like that. It was something that you would hide. It was very, very stigmatized. But then since the pandemic, I think it changed a lot, especially among young people. And now all the therapists are very busy, not just busy with clients, but busy holding different workshops. Companies are getting very much into it, and they're very conscious of having to also give their employees some sort of education when it comes to their mental health, so that they can avoid burnouts and all sorts of different issues that can arise from not taking care of their mental health. It's changed a lot, but I feel like there's still a lot of stigma. For instance, if you want to have your own practice, it needs to be somewhere where people cannot be seen entering. Or even if you're working for a private clinic, the clinic would always make sure that you have a separate door where other people don't see them, or that somebody doesn't hear they're going to see a psychologist or psychotherapist. But there's definitely many, many more people actually going, which is important. But it also kind of reflected now the need to have more psychologists and generally mental health practitioners also on the public level, because not everyone can afford getting help. So we have, every town in Montenegro has a mental health center within the secondary health institutions, which are called health centers. However, the waiting lists are sometimes 6 months. So can you imagine somebody, having a burning issue with their mental health, and somebody tells them, well, you can come for a talk in 6 months. There is a need to hire more people, and we have more people now dealing with mental health, but I think we need more mental health practitioners on the field, and we definitely need some sort of projects and means to also offer it for free to those who cannot afford it. One aspect of it that's kind of worrying to me personally is Montenegro is the 13th in the world according to the suicide rate. And that's extremely alarming. I think there's definitely a need to at least have an SOS line, which we don't. And the reason why we don't is because we don't have enough mental health practitioners on the field that are trained to deal with suicidal thoughts and people who have them. For us, it's mostly like suicide attempts. Okay, you go to the hospital, you're admitted, and the psychiatrist deal with it. But what about somebody coming in because they have suicidal thoughts and they're worried, and you cannot tell them wait for 6 months?
So you don't have this infrastructure to basically have these source lines for different causes?
Currently, no. Currently not. I think kind of infrastructure is there, but we need more people, and we need people who are trained to deal with this specific issue. Because 600,000 citizens, and then every year you have 130 people who commit suicide. And when you look at it mathematically, it's really, it's a lot. It's a lot. We recently had an amazing workshop given to us by a therapist from Finland who works in a clinic who only deals with suicide attempts and people who are suicidal or who have suicidal thoughts. And just the way they did it was just, it was amazing. They tried to look at each and every committed suicide and to try to understand why it happened. So to get like a sense of why is this happening. And I don't think it's impossible in Montenegro. I just think that we need to also use, we are a country who is a candidate to becoming a member of the European Union. I'm sure that there are ways to use this candidacy and get support from the other countries, at least through education, if nothing else, because we have a lot of psychology students now. Every year we have about 200 people who become psychologists, who gain a bachelor in psychology. I'm sure that if there is a kind of a systemic plan on where to put these people and how to educate them and how to guide them, not everyone can be a clinical psychologist, of course, but if there was kind of a plan, I'm sure that this situation could be resolved, or at least understood, if not resolved. Obviously, we cannot prevent people from committing suicide, but I think that these numbers could be definitely lower if we can understand something about it, if we can kind of see what the pattern is, like what is happening.
What is your society teaching about child-parent relationship, and whether this value of society also influence how you design your intervention as a therapist?
Relationship towards seeking help for mental health, I think also the parental relationships are evolving. And that is more kind of generational. Every kind of generation had their own parenting guru and parenting style that was kind of put forward at the time. So this generation now obviously has the same and has more and more knowledge. But for Montenegro, it's also quite cultural. And if you were born anywhere in the 80s or the 90s, I think that the pervasive disciplining style was definitely physical discipline, physical punishment. And I think that today we have kind of legally recognized that this is not the right thing to do. But I think that in reality, it still happens quite a lot. Maybe not to the extent it used to happen, but it happens a lot. And when I speak to parents, and parents are now people who were children in the 80s and the 90s, most of them, of course, they tell me that for them, that is what they were taught. And that I feel like they kind of show a sense of loyalty to their own parents or to their own family by doing the same things they were doing. And also kind of a loyalty to some sort of cultural perspective on how are you supposed to parent. But it is changing, and a lot of parents feel very uncomfortable. They would share that they have, for instance, hit their child or spanked them, but they're extremely uncomfortable with it, and they are sharing and they are trying to change that. But it's very deeply ingrained in our culture, and it is not easy, especially because grandparents, so people who were parents in the 80s and the 90s, are very much present in the upbringing of their grandchildren. today. They're very much there and influencing the whole process. There's also another issue that I see changed a lot for the better, is I think also before parents were very much expecting that the society needs to also do its part with the upbringing of children. And it's a very socialist view, but we were and we to some extent still are a socialist country. And it's, okay, I'm supposed to be a parent to a certain age, and after that, the school will take care of it, or whomever, it's also, they also need to be involved. While today I think the parents kind of see how important it is that they are involved. Peers, schools, yes, they matter, but the foundation and the core family and the parenting matters. And I think that parents today in Montenegro kind of see that. They're much more involved, especially fathers. I have to say that I kind of get very pleasantly surprised, because it was not the case in my time, that now, the mom would be the first one to contact, but the father will come. Like he will be there. He is present. He has a say in things. And I think that the new generations are much more open to work on the relationship with their children, and they're much more open to, for instance, if you recommend a book, they will read it, they will accept it, they will not just brush it off. As I said, it's hard for them because of this cultural inheritance in that sense, but things are changing for the better, and I'm optimistic.
And what would you say, let's say the adult client comes to you and say, I don't want to contact with my parents anymore. How would you approach from a therapeutic point of view, but maybe also what are the cultural expectations here?
So there is it actually happened to me very recently. Sometimes when we speak about boundaries, and in Montenegro it's a lot about boundaries, it's a very small country, and every town is a very small town, and everybody knows everybody. Even if you don't want to speak to your parents, you're most likely to see them 3 times a day, even if you're not speaking. Like, sometimes it's physically hard to avoid people. It is very, very small, to give you a perspective of things. So with a client, I just did something called boundary motion. And I asked them to kind of sort people in their life. In one column, it's people who kind of drive them forward, which give them kind of optimism and push them to kind of advance generally in their life. Then the second column is kind of people who give them a feeling of stagnation. They don't push them forward, but they're not pulling them backwards either. And then the third column is people who really leave them with a negative feeling about themselves, who just make them go like 2 steps back if they ever made a step forward. And I never say include your parents or include this one. I just say, put whoever has any kind of influence on you. And more often than not, my clients from Montenegro will definitely mention their parents and definitely put them in the third column. So people who kind of pull them backwards. And when I ask why is that, we always come to this topic of boundaries. There's a lot of crossing the boundaries, especially it happens a lot with clients who already have their own families now, who are now parents. I think that's when the boundaries are crossed the most. A lot of times what I would hear, oh, my mom or dad would just come at random times without calling. It comes from a place of love, but it definitely is the case of crossing boundaries. So we speak about it in a sense of how do we establish those boundaries in a healthy way, and how do we try to save that relationship? Because I think most of the time it's important, obviously not when it comes to a very abusive or toxic relationship, but when it's situations like this, I really try to kind of save those relationships, but also save my client. We a lot of times practice, okay, I'll be your parent. You tell me not to come every day at 7 o'clock in the morning and wake me up and my family. So we do a lot of role plays, and more often than not, I think they are surprised as to how their parents react when they try to establish boundaries by just clearly communicating them. So I always try to be positive about it, and I try to save those relationships and improve them. But obviously there are times when I really feel that it's kind of counterproductive for my clients to maintain certain relationships. And more often than not, those relationships kind of break up by themselves through some extreme arguments, because Montenegrins are very passionate. It's much harder to actually communicate calmly, especially with a Montenegrin parent, than to be explosive. So, and if you didn't know the language and you would be present at a family lunch, you would think that people are just fighting and hate each other. But sometimes even when they love you, they will tell you that in a very, high kind of frequency, and trying to convince you to do something for your own good.
What are the learned beliefs regarding client-therapist relationship, and can the relationship continue outside the therapy once the therapy process is over?
I would come back to the previous question. So as I told you, it's very hard to avoid people here. So it is very likely that you're going to end up seeing your current clients or your previous clients all the time. It is very likely that you will have joint friends, that you would possibly be cousins that you didn't even know. So I don't recommend it, and I don't maintain relationships, but I think that those lines are sometimes blurred just because of the practicality of life here. And how is the relationship perceived? I think, as I said, that kind of it's evolving to seek help. I think there is also kind of a learning curve with what a therapist means, that there are some ethics involved. And I feel like Montenegrins still think, oh, if I go and I speak to this person, they will for sure say something and the whole town will know what's happening with me. This doesn't, of course, happen, but I think there is a lot of fear going into therapy. And I think that we as therapists in Montenegro need to work much more than in other countries, maybe, to kind of gain the trust of a client to start telling you something, or to start telling you what is actually wrong. Because what happens here a lot, and it happened to me so many times with my clients from Montenegro, that I thought that maybe I'm attracting some sort of a pattern when it comes to people, is they will come for 1 session, 2, 3 sessions, just chatting, I'm a bit nervous, this, that, no big problem. And then I would just, I would take my time, listen to them, but after a few sessions, I would like, is there something that you actually want to tell me? Like, what would we be speaking about if we didn't speak about your work? And then they would come with a huge issue. Is it a secret? Is it something? And I was always kind of, what am I doing wrong? Why are my clients doing this to me after 5 sessions? Why don't they just come? I came because of this. And then I started working with international clients, and it was immediate, like, I'm not wasting my time with you. I'm going to tell you immediately why I came, what's my problem, where am I going? And then I realized it's cultural, and it's the way people see the relationship with a therapist. So they do grow to trust you over time, and they value that relationship. They are not good with keeping boundaries. A lot of them will call you outside of sessions. They will be late. They will stay longer. So that's something, my kind of battle for structure with my clients is very important, with my Montenegrin clients. But they do value that relationship a lot, and they hold on to it with their life for as long as they are a part of it.
So you are showing them boundaries in real time, setting boundaries regarding therapy setting, and they can learn from you as well.
Absolutely. I think it's very important. It's one of the issues whenever I speak to my colleagues from supervision. It's always like, they come late, stay longer, or they're late with payment, or there's always some sort of issue. It's just our culture is very much easygoing, it doesn't matter if I'm late, doesn't matter if I stay longer, there's life here moves at a much slower pace than elsewhere in the world, generally speaking.
Is supervision a must for a therapist in your country?
Yes. To my knowledge, for systemic family therapy, it's a must. It's a supervision and also group peer intervision with people that go to the same educational school with you and are at the same level, obviously, of education. So it is a must, and I believe, from what I know from other colleagues, that other schools also require it. I think even after education, I think that's something that's definitely advisable.
It's a must, you said, during education and also after, but there is no actually like an entity that checks that. So basically, if I decide I want to have a supervision, I can.
So speaking from the Systemic Family Therapy Association, they do check whether you are doing supervision, at least during the education. After the education stops, then I don't think that it's not necessary, but it is very much advisable. I'm sure that the other schools, at least during the education, they definitely do check that you are actually being supervised. But to be honest, whenever I speak to colleagues, everybody has a supervisor still. And I feel like, to me, when I think about it, I cannot imagine a therapist not having somebody to speak about their work and their clients.
What are the most common complaints that a client comes to therapy for?
Most common complaints, I would say, are anxiety and depression. And it can be for different reasons. When it comes to my clients, it happens a lot during certain life transitions. It has a lot to do with children and how kind of children influence their parents. But there's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of anxiety when it comes to work, to finances, kind of having a stable work and a stable income. So I would say mostly depression and anxiety.
And if I return to suicide rates a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
in your opinion, why do you feel there is so much suicide in Montenegro?
I honestly cannot tell. It would be kind of irresponsible for me to claim something. You would hear different stories. You would hear somebody was terminally ill. You would hear that there were financial issues. But a lot of times, actually, with majority of cases, people don't know. People genuinely don't know. And most of these times those were people who never sought help. So sometimes, and actually a lot of times, families are very kind of struck suddenly as to what happened and are puzzled. And so when I think about it like that, I think the stigma of not seeking help is actually what probably mostly influences this. I think if there was just more kind of freedom to seek help when you have mental health issues, I think whatever the reason is, it's something we can talk about. So I think that might be why.
And the stigma, if I seek help, so what is the stigma behind seeking help?
If I seek help for my mental health, I'm crazy. Something's wrong with me. I have rarely heard of somebody coming to me and saying, I took a sick leave because I had crippling anxiety. I had clients who had to basically leave their jobs just because they couldn't function. And they were so ashamed of going to the doctors and asking for papers proving that. Because they thought, well, if I return to work like that, people will think I'm crazy. Yeah.
And the doctors, health professions, are they open to mental health help?
I genuinely think that the doctors here are happy to help, but I just feel like people are just not speaking openly about it so much. I genuinely think that there will be no issue for a doctor prescribing sick leave for anxiety. but somebody needs to diagnose it before. I don't think that the doctors would care. But going to have that conversation and being diagnosed, that's extremely hard.
If you would share one tool, belief, or approach that is a must-have for you as a therapist, what would that be?
I don't have a specific tool, and a lot of times, especially when you're in education, for the first few years, I was very kind of feeling that I'm under pressure when I'm in a therapy session to use all the interventions and all the techniques and all the exercises and all the tools that I have kind of in my head or somewhere. But kind of with experience, what came kind of as a feeling to me is that I'm always the happiest with a session when I use myself, in the sense that I am there for my clients and kind of showing them empathy and listening to them. And sometimes, I'm not going to lie, with a lot of clients, I have some sort of a plan. Okay, this is what I'm going to do today. This is what I'm going to try and achieve. And these are the interventions I'm going to use. And this is how I think we're going to get there. But I'm always surprised they come and I feel like, look, at this situation, this is not going to benefit them. They're not always going to benefit from this. They're going to benefit from me being there, showing them that I'm there for them, showing them empathy, listening to them, rather than kind of overwhelming them with sense of direction and we need to resolve this. And all they need sometimes is truly to know that as a therapist, you're there for them and that this relationship is stable and that they can bring to it, whatever happened that day. So I've kind of learned over time to step away, to plan, but also to step away comfortably from those plans and just try to be there and kind of be truly a support for my clients. I also do a lot of educational workshops. And recently I was doing one and the topic was work-life balance. But the people who came, they had you can tell that they have absolutely no intention of speaking about the topic. They came with speaking about their children, they speaking about this, that. And because I was doing it with a younger colleague of mine, she was like, we have to put them back on the track. We have to tell them about this technique of time management. And I was like, you know what? We don't. They didn't come here today. This was not a day for them to listen about time management. They had a need to speak about something completely different. And the best thing we can do now is to listen. And that's what we did. And they were extremely happy after this workshop, even though, to be honest, we didn't say anything useful to them about the actual topic. But they were just extremely happy. And that's actually what I've learned, that the best tool I can use is just myself. And I think also clients see when you are there and when you are not there for them.